Hi, I'm Phil Caveney, and I'm here with my buddy Brock. And I've been thinking about art and art history. And one of the reasons for that is that I've been an artist and a creative producer for the last 60 years, ever since 70 years actually, because well, it doesn't matter what, but I have produced things, and I've been quite interested in what we call art, what we valorize as art, and what gets into art museums. But we're also living at the edge of a cusp of technological change. Uh, Rock was born into it, and I was in my 30s when I became aware of it. And now I'm remembering that in 1987 I presented a paper on the movie Blade Runner at the International Conference on the Fantastic and the Arts. And at that point, the fantastic was just breaking in to using computer applications to generate things that couldn't be really shown in the real world of time and space. And as a matter of fact, I sort of hung out with a guest of honor who at that time was working at the University of Illinois Computing Center at Champaign, Urbana, Illinois, and developing the idea of a new kind of artistic image that maybe had no real location in time and place. Now we talked about this earlier. Brock and I talked a little bit about Walter Benjamin, and Brock brought this point up that I hadn't really thought about because I was saying, well, what's lacking in electronic art? And I said, well, maybe the idea was that the aura was lacking. And so if you could create something that you could sort of stick an aura on, like a smiley face from the internet or something like that, then you would be able to produce a product. Of course, that's bullshit. That's not what it was. That's not what it was. But what Benjamin was really saying was that we're loosening the constraints on a work of art. So it's hard to tell which is the original and which is the copy and which has been individual reproduced and what has been collectively produced. Now I'm going to resist my temptation to talk about myself, and I'm going to go to the theme of this ongoing core idea we're going to. I've spent my life in the academic world, and I like to think it's been a haven for my research. And since though I do have advanced degrees and lots of publication, I never had the kind of job where you had to worry about tenure. Well, as I was reflecting, I took an art history course a couple years ago, and I was really very unhappy with it because what I saw happening with art is that, at least the way it was taught, was we weren't talking about the art that was produced. We were talking about who produced it. And we weren't looking at the artwork as artwork, but we were looking as art as a means to achieve EDI, equity, uh, diversity, inclusiveness objectives, which I have no objection to. And as a matter of fact, it never really works, at least in the art museum or something like that, where you work for kind of a forced inclusion. Now, what do I mean by this when I talk about from the Guerrilla Girls to the Bored Ape Yacht Club? Well, I did a paper which I got a D minus on, by the way, and I say that with pride, on the Guerrilla Girls and getting into the historical idea of what they were trying to do. And in the beginning, it was pretty neat because art history was a male dominated field And the standard art history text by a guy named Jansen had maybe 3,000 works of art and absolutely none by women. And some people confronted him with this, and he said, "Well, it's simple. There's no art by women; they can't do it, so I didn't include them." Okay, so in reaction to this, some very courageous women appeared in what you call a happening event, and they were dressed as gorillas in gorilla costumes, and they had the names of famous women writers and artists that you maybe hadn't heard about attached attached to their costume, their gorilla suit, so that nobody could take any action against them. And you would see, like their nice shoes and stockings and sticking out of their gorilla paws and things like that. But it was kind of neat. It was even delightful. But what happened with the progression is, yeah, the artwork broadened and more were included in it. More attention was paid to women artists. And as recent 2 years ago, they had a symposium on the issues that the Guerrilla girls had brought up, and they had it in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So you've got a representative from the Guerrilla girls sitting on a panel with all these stodgy old art historians. And what the problem is there's not enough panels at art history conventions to accommodate everybody. And there's not enough space in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I don't think that the way we value art should only be thought of as we fight our way into the museum space. It's like with music. In the 30s, when Benjamin and his Frankfurt School crew were looking at American jazz, which is probably the best thing that ever came out of America. They were calling it music by undeveloped savages that even danced. American culture was so bad, and yet I did a paper on this too. And there's a very famous singer, Billie Holiday. She's a jazz singer. I'm dying. I'm diversing a little bit here, but I'm trying to keep my Frankfurt School focus. And she did a song called "Strange Fruit." This is in the 30s with a blues background. And the strange fruit it alludes to someone being lynched in Alabama. That's your strange fruit. And she starts her song with the whole every light in the nightclub is out, and a single cigarette as she sings the line. Now, what I'm getting to here is to say that she was not canonized, put in the body of scientific of artistic and literary knowledge. She had to die a miserable death first to gain her acceptance. And there's many artists like that. Van Gogh never saw a painting in his lifetime. And what I'm saying is to get into this artistic world, it's more than elbowing each other out of the way for art history space, for museum space, or even for teaching space. I mean, we should be able to study art. All right. Now, what does this relate to the bored apes? Well, the bored apes, you can't really tell who makes the bored apes. I mean, there's metaspace, as they're calling it now, is almost like a curtain in an audition. You can't see the work is separated from the person who produces it, and the it's a difference sort of between trying to fight your way into a museum, as I would argue what the Guerrilla girls really are about. art history jobs, a way of earning a living, and that's cool. But if some of these talented people would let their work make their own museum, if you have to build a museum around the work of art rather than try to shove it in the door, I think the internet has the capability of doing that. And I'm even going back through my older works now, and I'm just doing it. I've been editing all day, and had I not thought of it, thought of this potential, I would just have a bunch of old computer files that somebody would look at after I'm gone. And instead of doing that, I'm back to work. And we haven't even got near monetary value here. I'm going to take a little bit of a break and see if Brock wants to ask me some more questions, or he minds if I sort of went on this tirade.
No, so kind of what you're saying is it's the internet in a way, if it kind of creates a meritocracy through pseudo
Yeah,
anonymity.
yeah,
So it's kind of like it's ironic, um, with Benjamin being a Marxist, understanding capitalism, but I wonder if he would have seen, because I guess you could argue that selling NFTs on the internet is is more like a true capitalism where there's not, I mean, there's forces behind the scene, but it's not a necessarily like an aristocracy or like a all, you know, oligarchy, or kind of like the real world. So
yeah,
is that kind of how you tie it in with Benjamin a little bit, or?
yeah. It is. And there's a group. I have to find this author because he's Frankfurt School also, and he thought that just about everyone could become a creative producer. Now, in the early Marx in the philosophical papers, when he was just not much more than being a teenager, he thought of a world that would end. Well, it wouldn't necessarily be a meritocracy, but it would be a world where he said, I could fish in the morning, I could hunt in the afternoon, I could live the life and do what I wanted, and there would be enough production to support us that nobody would have to do something they didn't like. And that was a bit idealistic, but it's a part of Marx that's a different conclusion from the failed Marxist states we've seen in the 20th and the 21st century. But I like the idea of a potential for a meritocracy. And this is something that when I wrote a paper called Creative Tension, which I put up on my blog, and as my own response to a bunch of academic critics after being kicked out of the academic world the first time, I thought, wow, if that's I wrote the paper 43 or 44 years ago, and 44 years back, more years back, we have the we have Benjamin's work, and so across the course of my life, I can say, well, being an artist went from this to this to this, and there's a chance for a positive progression. I mean, the idea of the apes is neat and ironic stuff. The ideas of the Guerrilla Girls is neat and ironic. It it makes art more discussable. You know.
Yeah, it's almost, do you see like, how would you tie it in? Would you make any analogies to like the Renaissance?
Well, there was
Out of
surely a
curiosity, out of
revolution.
curiosity with
Yeah,
the internet.
yeah, there was. Yes, I would. And just as the cloud, or the, I don't know what's better, the cloud or the internet to call it, represented a technological revolution, the development of perspective, which allowed you to view a landscape, a painting, just about anything from a God's eye view, a perspective, a different point of view. The internet allows you to do the same thing. And as a matter of fact, they're a similar thing, certainly not the same thing. But I did some of my graduate work comparing the internet to the printing press as an age of change. And as a matter of fact, I can tell you that when you get into the high Renaissance, as far as painting goes, you see the master more like a supervisor in a workshop than an actual isolated individual artist. I mean, it's a big business. I mean, there's a book by a writer named Joseph Heller, and it's on, uh, oh God, Plato reflecting on the bust of Socrates, and these Dutch masters, when they mastered the change and the new things about perspective, they really started turning paintings out, and it got to be to the point where they said that I a fake Rembrandt was worth more than a real Rembrandt because it looked better. And somebody told Rembrandt, "Well, it's simple. You're going to have to fake your own work." And the guy that wrote that book, his name was Joseph Heller. He wrote Catch 22, and he was kind of an icon of my generation. I mean, he had been a bomber pilot in the Second World War, and he comes out and he's writing about art history. And the thing is that you and I can talk like this, two retired guys, and in the process of talking, we gain. I mean, we're the ones that are linking the Guerrilla girls with the Bored Ape Yacht Club. We did that. Nobody else did that. We acquire some authority by looking into this and discussing it, it seems to me. And I think the thing I want to add is we would include other people in the discussion. And I can bet that if we put Guerrilla Girls and Bored Ape Yacht Club in our header for the title for this show, we're going to get hits. They're going to come. They may come with pitchforks and tire, but they're going to come.
Yeah. Well, I guess at some point we should talk more about the Bored Apes itself, but kind of stitching it across time because you got the, you know, the history knowledge. Is it more
Well, and
is it probably more like the Enlightenment?
well, you know, that's
NFT.
funny. That's funny because
It's,
in one of
it's
my
not like
stories,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, in one of my stories, I I refer to the way the Scottish Enlightenment is reflected in the portrait of this woman. It's in my how's that story? Oh, Marjorie Burns, yeah. You know, and I say that in the Scottish Enlightenment, they were trying to escape from the grimness and the darkness of the Reformation. They were jealous of the Catholics having all the fun because they could confess it. Yeah, yeah. I want you to talk a little bit more about the Bored Apes, and I didn't mean to talk so much.
No, just to give people context if they're listening. I assume most people listen will know about the Bored Apes, but um, some may not know. And I just I watched, you know, I read the stuff you sent me. I don't personally own any NFTs, so I'm not an expert, but um, some of the interesting things that I saw in it is they have artists that make these drawings of the apes, but they draw components of the apes, and then you know, the assembly of the components of the apes is digitized, so all the apes are unique, and they make 10,000 apes, and they have different characteristics, which would have been created by the original artists, and some of the characteristics are much more rare than others. So somebody might highly value an ape and pay more for an ape that has a bunch of rare characteristics. Um, But what I kind of see with it is I'm like, okay, well, that's. I mean, the art is interesting. They've caught my eye in the past when I see like Twitter or something, and I remember I first saw some on people's profiles. I'm like, what is that? I'm like, that's kind of cool. I wonder what it is. Well, wish I'd have looked into it at the time and bought them because now they're going like northwards of $250,000. Not that I ever would have foreseen that or anything. But um, what's interesting is I think a lot of the value comes not necessarily from the art. I think the art in itself is good, um, but from the community, and that's kind of what we would talked a little touched on when we talked about Benjamin was art as community, rather than like a cult phenomenon in the sense of like religious used by like religions or spirituality or that kind of thing to be kind of kind of constrained or withheld from the public.
Yeah.
This is kind of the opposite. It has formed its own cult, ironically, but what's kind of interesting is the community that is developed around it, and I think that's what gives it its value. You've had like Jimmy Fallon has bought one. There's some a number of NFL players have bought them. Musical artists, um, but there's different. They have like they're building a nightclub in Miami. They had a big meeting where hundreds of them that you had to own an ape to get into it, and they had a yacht that came in, I think out off of like out in New York or something, and so they had admittance to this yacht. And there's quite a vibrant community that has grown up around um, these bored apes. And what's interesting is it the it's actually the owners of the apes are very diverse. And so, what you were touching on earlier, this kind of happened naturally, that it brought a bunch of people with unique background or different unique backgrounds together, and they all bond over their ownership of this non-fungible token. So I found that kind of interesting, and like I think Benjamin would have found that interesting. Any thoughts on that?
Tell, yeah, yeah. Tell me a little bit more about the way the governing token works, as far.
Yeah, I don't know that they have a governance token yet. I think from what I read, they're working on one. But
Uh-huh.
the thing about the digital apes, and I think that's part of the reason they've developed a community, is that they give more benefits to the owners of the apes. And so, like one thing they did is um, they'll never mint more than 10,000 of the apes, and so the people who own those 10,000 are like the OG, of the apes. But when what they did is they came up with mutant apes, and so all
Uh,
those people that owned those apes um, had it got another ape created from their ape, um, and so it gave them like I don't know what exactly what they call it, I forget, but like some kind of mutant juice that they use. Well, they
uh,
just minted a new NFT and created a new ape that looks highly mutated. But then some of those had like more rare characteristics. So of the 10,000 people that owned them and got one of those for free, airdrops to them, there was some weird characteristic that only 6 of the 10,000 apes had. So that's almost like hitting a lottery ticket, and you had that crack at it. And now those apes are worth about $30,000. So it's almost like a dividend in a stock or something, where it kicked off that additional
mhm.
money that they could just go sell on the open market. So they got more than just the original, you know, ape. It like has a value, and it looks like they're coming up with ways to use that value going forward. Like I think they'll vote on letting different people use like the images of apes and advertisements and stuff like that. And then I'm assuming
Uh-huh.
some of that money will go back into the NFT holders, and it'll show up like in their digital wallet. I don't know exactly, but um, all the technical stuff of it, but it's kind of like part of the offering more value than just the image itself.
Well, one of the standing critiques of capitalism is that it alienates us. It separates us from the other. It separates us from the people around us, so that the only thing that's really in our life is this pressure to work ourselves to death. And something that creates a community, be it apes or chess or whatever it might be. You know, it makes people feel a part of something, which is much better than thinking you're the only person in the world that might have had this interest, shared this thing, or you find others like you. I mean, if you're ever wondering about whether or not you should have acquired your ape or not, at least you've got several thousand other people who would be wondering too, and that makes a community, doesn't it?
It does. And so because I looked for curiosity, I thought, well, maybe at some point, maybe I'll try to look into this and see if I can buy like an NFT or something just to learn about it. And I
Yeah,
looked at, you mentioned chess, and I looked and I found this one collection called Crazy Crow's Chess Club. And
yeah,
what's interesting is I want to say, like they first you could buy them before they're minted, and it cost you like the equivalent of maybe $150. It was like 0.03 Ethereum, and
uh,
Ethereum was like 4 grand or something. So you're
yeah,
talking 120, $150 something. And that was like
yeah,
in August. And when you I went to their page, and I don't want to misquote it here and get in trouble from them or something, but it looked like they were going to try to develop this community around it and hold chess tournaments and all this kind of stuff. And so I kind of looked at it, and I noticed a lot of them were you could get some for like $10. You know, I mean, so basically, a lot of people are just trying to give them away at this point. And so I went to like the site on chess.com. They had a link to it to just try to see, are they having tournaments? Is there a community? And it looked
yeah,
like there wasn't hardly anything in there posted since like October, and it was very sparse from what I could tell. Now, maybe those
yeah.
people have access to something. I didn't go into try to get into the Discord channel or anything like that. But just looking on like chess.com, it looked kind of like it didn't have a vibrant community at all. And then if you look at the price of the NFTs, I think that's reflected in the price. So, and then the other thing interesting
So,
is any thoughts on, everybody probably gets mad or doesn't or thinks it's BS that those bored apes and the crypto punks and stuff are so expensive. Do you have any thoughts on that? Um,
well, I think if it would almost make an interesting hobby to try to get in on the next one. I mean, if one sense something, you could almost go with your own interest. What's interesting, you know. I mean, if you miss this one, well, what do you expect from it? I mean, do you want a hobby? Do you want a retirement plan? I don't know. I mean, I think considering what people, the absurd things people spend money on now, this seems almost life affirming.
yeah, well, that's what I found interesting because I read the article that you emailed me, and in there they
Yeah,
talked about how it's not really that crazy if you stand back and look at it and compare it to what the ultra wealthy spend their money on, in
yeah,
the real world, if you want to say it that way. And they buy ridiculous things. They buy $20 million houses and all kinds of stuff that they don't need. And then the article also referred to the fact that there's like 100,000 people that became millionaires from buying Bitcoin. Well, this one goes on Ethereum, and so there's probably half as many people as that became millionaires off of Ethereum. So they already have like the currency that's used to buy that product. So it maybe it's not as surprising as you think. And then also, like, one thing we never touched on, but I see it as like now those people forever have this image that's like a bragging right because they were one of the
yeah,
people that got in early on this. And either you had to like foresee this and be in real early on the space and understand to get it, or else you had to have a lot of money to do it. And so the communities become kind of exclusive, and it's kind of has like, it's basically you're buying like extreme bragging rights. So you get to put this picture out on the internet, basically flexing, and yeah, it's interesting.
yeah. Well, I'm looking. Do you realize that we've used 50 minutes already?
Oh, not quite. We've been going for half an hour.
Half an hour?
Yeah, but we
Well,
can wrap it up. We just wanted to do a quick kind of extra show to just kind of dovetail on our Benjamin show and just try to think what Benjamin would think of these NFTs. And we just got thinking about artist community when we talked about Benjamin, and we thought the Bored Apes might be an interesting thing just to briefly discuss. And I think we accomplished that. So, anything you
Yeah.
want to say before we sign off here, Phil?
Well, I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, me too.
And and I got some really good news in my life fairly recently, and I want to keep with that. And I really enjoyed today.
All right. Till the next time.